Hello and welcome to this next edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and on tonight's show, as always, we are joined by the lovely Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Have you had a good week?
So far, so good. Yeah, it's been a great week.
Awesome. I must admit, I've had a good week as well. But we'll go into that in a little while. I also want to introduce our second co-host, Richard Clements. Hello, Richard.
Hi guys, how you going?
Oh, not too bad. Yeah, we had a good road trip at the weekend, didn't we?
Yes, it wasn't too bad at all. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellent. We went up to the what was it? The Civil War Museum.
Yes, that's right.
In where was it?
Newark. Come on, Paul.
I know. I just
keep up to date. It was only just down there at the weekend.
I know. I just keep because obviously tonight we're talking about Newgate Prison. And Newgate and Newark. I keep getting them mixed up.
Oh, I see. And what are you like?
I know. And how's our fourth co-host, the Marley the Malevolent Mutt?
Marley the Malevolent Dog.
That's it, the Mutt. M, all goes.
Vocal. Is all I'm going to say on that one. He's very vocal today.
Okay, excellent. So he might chime in with a bit of information for us tonight.
Quite possibly. Yeah, quite possibly.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, Siri's on form tonight as well, or today, by the sounds of it. I'm reading Ghostology by Steve Parsons at the moment.
Okay, cool.
And I think it's a book that every ghost hunter... or ghost investigator, should I say, should read, actually, because it really tells you a lot about the tech. You know, we talk about the tech being very integral in investigations and what you're recording and all that. And this book actually can be a bit baffling sometimes, you know, if you're not particularly tech-minded like myself. But it really does sort of like give you a good idea of what you're recording and what best equipment to use and how to use it in the best way. So guys out there, if you're an investigator, Ghostology by Steve Parsons is definitely one you should have on your bucket list to read if you've not already caught it, because it does, I think, you know, you're recording EMFs, but why? Because someone said that it's proof that there's a ghost there, but is it? You know, things like that. And the false positives that they can give and stuff like that, you know, like some pieces of, inanimate objects can give off an EMF reading.
Yeah, well, that's right. I've actually got a copy of that book, but as a lot of my books, that's on my to-read list. But I'll certainly get round to it with your recommendation there, Kerry.
Yeah, as I say, I've learned a lot, and I'm not a tech. You know, when I go out in the field, I'm a spiritual baby. It's definitely one to read if you are using tech, because it gives some really good points about the tech that you're using out in the field, from the simple ones like temperature gauges through to EMF meter readers and voice recorders, even down to SLS cameras and things like that. So, yeah, definitely one to read, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't got that book, but it definitely sounds good. But as you can see, my tech goes off randomly anyway.
And we all have that problem at times, don't we?
Tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, tonight's show, we're talking about Newgate Prison. So, Kerry, do you want to start off with this?
Yeah, the reason we're going down to talk about Newgate Prison was basically off the back of the show we did last week on the gallows. Because and this is one of the most notorious prisons in history, I would say. You know, in London, it is so well known and so notoriously bad that it would be remiss of us not to talk about it. Because again, you know, going back on the theme of what we spoke about last week, if it's about horrendous conditions and emotionally charged states, I don't think this prison could get away with not having hauntings related to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say.
It was sort of commissioned by King Henry II in the 12th century, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. But there's always been that, you know, when we was looking into this again, it's called Newgate because of the Romans even loved to wall. They loved to wall a city, didn't they? and their gates would be called different names. So, like in York City, incredibly famous, Micklegate. You've got I can't think of the others off the top of my head now. I've said that, but each gate is named, and this is where the name came from, because part of the wall that was used to build the prison was the gate of the old Roman wall, hence the name Newgate, because that's what the Romans had called it.
Yeah, makes sense. Why not?
Why not, indeed? Now, see, that led me down a whole different thought pattern, but I'll come to that later. You're going to love that one, guys. Now,
brace yourself, Paul.
God,
it's going to come. But first of all, let's talk about Newgate itself. Now, Newgate has had plenty of different incarnations. It's been rebuilt several times during its lifespan. And it's very difficult to pin down the exact point when Newgate actually became a prison, because it obviously, initially, it would have been a gatehouse.
Right,
okay, yeah.
So it's hard to pin down the exact point where it became the notorious prison that it actually was. But I actually think that the time period, when you look at the time period that we're discussing, is kind of like 1700s, 1800s, in the most horrific time of its life, as it were, was then.
Yeah.
But there are reliable records going back to 1218 of it being used to house criminals, but there may have been some before that. It's just we've got records from 1218, none sort of before that.
Oh, okay.
But then it sort of jumps. Then we sort of have a huge jump, because a new prison at Newgate was begun in 1770, and this is what I mean. The notorious bit and the horrendous conditions kind of start at this point in history, where it really gains feet with the old rumour mongering and the myths and legends that surround it. So, it's that time period that we are focusing on, really. Now, it was actually badly damaged before it was finished being built into the prison that we sort of imagine now. It was badly damaged by fire during the Gordon riots of 1780.
Oh, right, that must have been a rough time. And they set the prison on fire. They must have been popular, the Gordons.
Now, if I remember rightly, and I could be corrected on this, but I believe the Gordon riots are actually linked to something to do with banking. And do you remember there was a ghost story about the old lady of Threadneedle Street?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's supposed to be the wife of one of the guys who was in the Gordon riots.
Oh, right.
But the actual big Bank of England that's on Threadneedle Street, is actually called the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street.
Yes, I've heard it called that before. I didn't realise it was sort of like set around this sort of story. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Just a little side link there for everybody. But as I say, I'm sure it's to do with the Gordon riots because of the fire with Newgate, and it all came up when I was looking at it. So it wasn't actually completed until 1785. This building was then used as a prison, and actually it was a debtor's prison. So basically a debtor's prison is if you got in debt with somebody, and back in them days, a lot of people did things on hock, like on tab, we would call it now.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you couldn't afford to pay your tab, you'd then get took into the debtor's prison until you could clear your debt.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you'd get released. But it's a funny kind of... It's very ironic, because you're in debt, so you go to debtor's prison, but you have to pay for food, comfort, anything you have to pay for. Then you have to pay when you get released. It's really bizarre how the setup was. It was really bizarre. Richard?
Yeah, I've actually read around sort of like debtors' prisons and stuff, and as you say, Kerry, I still can't really quite get my head round it, but debtors' prisons were very common, and if anything, they were the forerunners to sort of like modern prisons. It seems you had debtors' prisons, the main incarceration was for debtors as opposed to criminals. I mean, your common criminals, what we would call jails, prisons today, were sort of just holding pens, but they seem to be particularly fixated on debtors for some reason, and you could be incarcerated for periods of time for actually being in debt.
Exactly, and this is really what Newgate was all about.
I think it was probably more a deterrent for the poor.
Don't get into debt, I think, is the message there. Otherwise you'll end up in Newgate prison.
Because if you was loaded, you could like live in luxury.
Well, yeah, certainly, and some of them did. I mean, because a lot of sort of like the aristocracy were getting to debt, with their gambling debts and stuff. And there's lots of records of them actually ending up in debtors' prisons, and some of them actually sort of did live the life of Raleigh.
If you could afford it.
Yeah, they would have their own rooms, furniture and everything in there. It would just be like sort of like a hotel for them. But they obviously couldn't go, but they were allowed guests and everything. So yeah.
So after the final rebuild in 1785, the prison was actually into two sections. It had a common area for the general public and a state area for those who could afford that more comfortable accommodation. So it really was down to how much money you had. You know what I mean?
I think I'll be down in the cellars somewhere.
I probably would be too, to be fair. Paul, would you be in comfort or would you be down in the cellars with me and Richard?
I think I'd probably be in the level below the cellar, I think.
The oubliette, eh?
Yeah, the oubliette.
We'll just forget about you.
Yeah,
we'll just chuck you down there and forget about you.
As long as I do my show once a week, it's fine.
Well, as long as they've got Wi-Fi, you should be all right.
Yeah, I'll be laughing. Yeah.
And this was around the same time. Remember, we talked about the gallows being moved to Newgate.
Yeah.
This was around the time that happened as well. So it became the site of the public gallows from Tyburn. It got moved from Tyburn to Newgate Prison. So it was outside. The public ones were outside Newgate Prison.
So it seems that Newgate's reputation really took off when the executions were moved from Tyburn to the front of Newgate Prison. That seems to when it sort of raised its profile and came into the public eye, so to speak.
I would imagine it probably already had a reputation for the poor people. Like, you say, you go to the debtors' prison and you just don't want to get there because if, you're in that much debt or whatnot. But, yeah, I would have thought that this is where it really took on that more sinister role because you're not just going there for debt. There are other prisoners as well there that are more notorious.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And, that they had obviously where the prison was, they were able to have large audiences all the way up until the public executions were abandoned in 1868.
Yeah, this exactly. But I still wonder how much room there would have been in the area. You know what I mean? It's, when we was looking at it last week, we were talking about the amount. That's the word I was searching for. Of people.
There was one. Yeah, there wasn't one execution rumoured to have like 200,000 people. That's
right. Yeah. So thinking of central London, because this is in the centre of London now. We're right in the city of London, the heart of London. So, and if you're thinking that Newgate was was part built out of the Roman wall, you are talking total centre of the city. How much room would there have been for these huge crowds? But it did still attract huge crowds, but it must have been all like bottlenecked down the roads into it.
Well, yeah, I've actually been down the road because it's the law courts are actually there. The Old Bailey's actually built on the site, and even today you walk down there, and there's not a lot of room down there. But you sort of think, and is that because of modern development around it? I mean, was there more space around it, sort of back in the 1700s? Quite possibly. The thoroughfares may have been wider. I don't know. It's quite difficult to get a sort of like an imagined sort of. What it was like, but I was looking on the internet. I was looking at some sort of not photos, but drawings of the prison and throughout its time, and it does look quite sort of spacious around it, I must admit. But and whether that's artistic license or not, I don't know.
Well, unless we went back in time in our little time capsule machine that we have got. We haven't used it yet, everybody, but we have got one of those.
We'll have to get Mr. Rook on that because he's our Time Lord. So
he is our Time Lord.
Absolutely. What do you fancy? Police box, telephone box, or DeLorean?
DeLorean. Cool. Want some of that?
Yeah. As a result of the Prisons Act in 1877, it actually stopped being a debtor's prison, and actually in 1882 was only used for those awaiting trial and prisoners sentenced to death awaiting execution. Right, so it became more a holding spot for people waiting trial rather than you pay your debt or you can get out kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's actually, because where Newgate is, it's actually next door to the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, right?
Yeah.
The old Bailey.
So not the new Old Bailey, the old Bailey.
The old Bailey.
Okay.
Because it's still separate. It's two separate buildings at this point. You've got Newgate Prison and the old, what's known as the Old Bailey or the Central Criminal Court. So it's easier to transport prisoners. If you think about it, you know, where some other prisoners, you know, you'd have to transport them, wouldn't you?
Well, that's right. And you think about it, it just makes logical sense to build your law court and your prison next door to each other, security reasons, and if nothing else. And as you say, I mean, it's just, it cuts down the logistics of transporting your prisoners everywhere. Everywhere.
You can literally just chuck the prisoners over the wall, couldn't you?
Yeah.
There you go, Bert. Another one we found guilty.
Yeah, there we go. Off he goes.
It does make me wonder how many prisoners who were like being transported to trial actually kind of like were saved by their mates. You know what I mean? Because it's only horse and cart. You know, all right, it might have been
I don't think it was actually that uncommon, actually. I mean, you know, I've sort of read records in the past where, you know, sort of there was a lot of, you know, and there's a few people that would actually get away, and especially if you were like a notorious and highwayman, then surely you would have some accomplices who would perhaps plot to sort of break you out or sort of like intercept you en route. So yeah, it's quite feasible.
Definitely. And if you think of the old Adamant analogy that we used last week, I'm a dandy highwayman, you know, you're going to have a gang. You're not you didn't tend to be a lone highwayman. No. You tended to have a gang. So I can imagine that was probably a very prudent move.
Oh, of course, yeah. Your bunch of brigands will come and save you. Yeah.
Saving the day. Excuse me. The Central Criminal Court Act of 1856 actually permitted prisoners from anywhere in the country accused of a very serious offence to be tried at the Old Bailey. So basically, by taking the case from an external town and bringing it to the Old Bailey, it stops that local prejudice, which I think we saw a lot of in the witch trials 100 or so years before this, or 200 odd years before this.
Yes, that's quite a prudent move, because before trials and stuff, you were tried in your local vicinity, like us living here in Essex. If we committed sort of like a serious crime, we'd be tried in Chelmsford, you know, but a lot of people might sort of know us or sort of stuff like that. So it was actually thought that, and this would only be for the more serious crimes, that you'd be taken off to London and be tried sort of centrally. And as you said, Kerry, with the sort of like the theory that the trial will not be prejudiced or the jury won't actually know you as such.
There was one main case that this was passed for. This is where you start realising the power of lawyers, isn't it?
Oh, of course.
You know, how they argue their case and how law acts are passed to accommodate things like this, because the act was actually passed to allow for a poisoner, William Palmer, who was actually in Staffordshire, to get a fair trial because of the local prejudice against him. And actually, with the advent of the railway system, you know, we had railways then as well now, it was actually possible, safer, to transport the prisoners over a considerable distance.
Well, yeah, the railway also had, like, prison carts as well, which means... obviously, it's not something they use now, but yeah, they did back then. They had prison cars,
faster than horses as well. So
probably a lot safer.
Yeah, and you think you can make a railway car pretty secure back in those days? You know, a cattle truck or something. Yeah, I mean, obviously, sort of this new form of transport at the time, and they would utilise it for all sorts of things and transporting prisoners. Why not?
Exactly. Now, this also happened with Maria and Frederick Manning and Kate Webster. They were all kept at Newgate before their trials, but they were returned to Surrey, which was where they came from, to the county jail for execution. So you'd have your trial, and then you'll be shipped back to your area.
I can understand that. Yeah,
for the actual execution.
Yeah, so, they wouldn't want to deny the locals that spectacle, no doubt.
Particularly if there's a lot of prejudice in the area.
Well, yeah, especially Mr. Poisoner guy earlier from Staffordshire.
Right, now this is where I want to bring up a slightly different concept. We're going to go off topic a little bit now, guys, right?
Oh, okay.
Because
off you go.
Surrey's County Jail, you're going to love this one, was at Horsemonger Lane.
Yeah.
And this brought me into mind of how places get their name.
Horsemonger?
Yeah. So, like a Horsemonger Lane, there's obviously a blacksmith or something that worked down there, and predominantly for horses, right? Or he was a killer of horses for horse meat. A killer. Yeah. That sounds awful. A butcher. That's a better word. Yeah. A butcher.
A monger, yeah, because the only sort of thing we have in monger these days is a fishmonger, isn't it? So, a monger, I would say, would sell, horse meat if he's a horsemonger.
Yeah, or he's a blacksmith predominantly for horses.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And there's Swains Lane, isn't there, which was by Highgate, where they used to drive the herds of pigs through.
Right. You mean swines?
No, it's Swains Lane.
Was it called Swain?
Swains Lane.
Yeah.
So, so how a place name is, particularly in ancient times, roads and places get names for for reasons. And we looked at this, we were talking about this, funny enough, last night, when we were looking at our surnames and what they mean and where they originated from. And actually,
that's right.
When you break it down, there's quite a few place names that are quite bizarre.
There is, yeah. There is quite a few. But then, obviously, with the newer towns and things that have sprung up, the names just get dished out willy-nilly.
So it's worth looking in the older towns and the older areas of places, the names of the lanes or the names of the roads and things like that. Because, like going back to the bank, Threadneedle Street.
Yeah.
You would assume that would be sort of where tailors once operated or something like that.
Yeah. Which actually...
But then it isn't just street names either, because even pubs.
Yeah.
I've spoken to Richard before about pubs called the Checkers. And the Checkers was almost like a staging area for the Roman Empire. So when they came over, they could transfer their denaries into the English currency.
So it was more like so it was like a toll gate sort of thing. Yeah. That makes sense, yeah.
But some of the pubs' names, especially the Checkers in particular, is one of those.
And Paul always points out a pub when we're out on the road, and if it's called the Checkers.
Yeah.
And you'll get loads of red lions, loads of black dogs. Black dogs.
Yeah.
That'll become relevant in a bit.
George and the Dragon.
George and the Dragon. Loads and loads of, places and roads are very relevant in regards to history of the place. And it's just, like even Newgate, how that name came about, it's got older origins. They're historic references.
Well, that's it.
But you usually find these older names are quite straightforward, aren't they? And they mean what they say. Newgate, it was in Newgate. Simple.
Does what it says on the tin, everybody.
Of course it
Absolutely.
does.
But I don't know if people sometimes join the dots and know if you know the historic reference, then some of the more weirder ones would actually have more relevance if you looked into it.
Mm.
Yeah,
I know there's a place near me and Kerry called Purfleet, and there's a rumour going around that going back to Elizabeth I, she was actually there when her fleet came back from the Spanish War, and there was only like one or two left, and they were all battle damaged, and they would come back, and she was quoted to saying, "Oh, my poor fleet," hence Purfleet. Over the time, it just sort of shortened a bit.
Aww.
Yeah.
Well, you like that, don't you, Kerry?
Oh, Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, and that's how that area got its name. And it's not far from Tilbury Docks, so it's sort of like all that.
Well, yeah, and that is where a lot of boats from the Armada actually sailed from to go out and confront the Armada, and that's where she actually saw the Armada off from, well, Tilbury Fort, or what is now Tilbury Fort.
But yeah, that's sort of the local legend sort of thing. Whether it is actually true, I don't know. I like that. Yeah,
we had a great investigation at a pub there called the World's End. It's just outside Tilbury Fort. It's based literally right by Tilbury Fort. And we had a spirit box session going, and you could hear drum beats, and then you heard a bugle on the spirit box, and it was really weird because it was getting louder and louder, and there was no denying that this was drum beats. Do you know what I mean? Like you would expect. And then when we heard the bugle, we were all like, "Did everybody?" And it was one of those, "Did you hear that?" moments.
Everyone knew what it was, and everyone looks at each other and go, "Did you hear that?"
Just out of curiosity, was there any events going on in the fort?
No.
Because I have actually done reenactments at Tilbury Fort many years ago. So,
I've covered one for St John Ambulance, covering one of those sort of events.
But Tilbury Fort is a nice fort, and it's quite an atmospheric fort. It's very roomy. Yeah. I do like it. It a lot.
People live in there as well. Still.
Yeah. They've got like a terrace of houses in there. You just go in, it just looks like a normal, sort of 18th century. But yeah, people live there. I'd love to live there.
Yeah, only a couple of the houses are in use, but the others are like for the museum. But yeah, I think like one or two on the end, people live there.
Funnily enough, on the night when we was doing the investigation, the medium that we had working with us that night was picking up on Jack the Ripper links. But we didn't find any evidence to suggest that whoever Jack the Ripper was or any of his victims were linked to that pub. So we didn't actually get any historical backup, as it were, for what he was saying. So it was an incredibly interesting investigation that night, I will say.
It sounds it. I've actually heard you speak about it before. So, it'd be interesting to see if we can actually get down there at some point.
Well, we may well have to try it. But anyway, I'd like to do Tilbury Fort anyway, just because know more about it now. Anyway, back to Newgate. It was actually closed in 1902, so the new Central Criminal Court, which opened in 1907, could be built on the site. So it was expanded. The Old Bailey was expanded, and that's where it became what we know and love today as the Old Bailey.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it got razed to the ground, basically.
Yeah.
But in its time, it was the principal prison for London and Middlesex, and did house prisoners of both sexes. It was a prison for remanding in custody and prisoners awaiting transportation or execution, and as we've said, a debtor's prison.
Mm-hmm.
When it closed, male prisoners were shipped off to Pentonville, and female prisoners were shipped off to Holloway Prison. So that's when we talked about, again, going back, we're covering this briefly because we talked about this more in depth last week. It became segregated, whereas up until this point, although it was segregated within the prison, it wasn't a segregated prison, as it were, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can understand. Yeah, they were sort of one in one wing, one in the other, if they did have wings as such, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, London was the crime capital of England, so...
As you would think.
I think just density of people on that one, don't you?
Absolutely. It was overcrowded a bit.
A little bit overcrowded. As you think about the slums in early Victorian times, absolutely massive overcrowding and bad living conditions in total. It was just horrendous. We had a lot of migration coming in, and the slums themselves were just like overflowing with people. It was absolutely horrendous living conditions back then. So Newgate obviously was the execution capital, and between 1783 and 1902, a total of 1,169 people were actually put to death there.
Well, there you go. There's not a lot you can really say about that.
Exactly.
I know, right?
And do you say all good, or do you say, oh, well, yeah?
It was quite And these are publics, so you've got to remember, it's public executions up until 18, whatever the date was.
Wasn't a few of those hangings, though, carried out elsewhere?
Some of them were, some of them were carried out elsewhere, but Newgate all came out in Newgate. I think the point was that they were all imprisoned at Newgate, so it's classed as a Newgate hanging rather than anything else. It was called the Bloody Code.
Yeah.
And it remained in force up to 1836.
I still think the men got a rough deal, because 1,120 of that figure was men and 49 were women.
Yeah, well, us women aren't as bad as you boys.
No,
sugar and spice and all things.
Half of them blokes were stitched up by the women, I reckon.
Whatever you want to believe, my darling. It's you men driving us women to it. We discussed that last week as well.
See, that's what it is. The men drive the women to it, and then the women stitch the blokes up to get rid of them.
Nothing worse than a woman scorned is a whizzing. We said that last week.
Oh,
dear. Over 200 felons were punishable by death. Now, these are crimes that you could commit. So the felons are crimes you committed that had the execution sort of like penalty attached to them. That's 200.
Like 200 of these.
Yeah.
That's just about everything, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything you wouldn't get hung for.
I bet that 200 just wanted the break from their missus.
I was looking even shoplifting.
Yeah.
Would have been a capital offence.
Yeah.
It's you sort of look at it from today's point and viewpoint, and you think, well, that's a bit hard. But if you think about sort of the 1800s and before, the 1700s, I mean, stealing from someone that was their livelihood. I mean, times were it was a lot more. Things were a lot more important, and if you took something from someone that didn't belong to you, yes, that was a serious offence. It may be looked upon as a bit more petty now, but not back then.
Well, over 200 crimes were punishable by death, although it does state that the more minor ones, although you got sentenced to death, tended to be reduced to transportation. Now, transportation is basically shoved on a ship and sent off to the colonies, isn't it?
Yeah. Basically, that's it. And as you said, Kerry, there was sort of like 200 capital offences, but the lesser ones, like the shoplifters and your basic sort of thieves and stuff like that, and they would have been held at the Newgate Prison until sort of ships became available, and then taken to the prison hulks and shipped off.
And when you were talking about, like shoplifting or stealing, we know how serious an offence that was considered because of how pirates, who were basically stealing all the cargo from ships, were punished. And that was pretty harsh. We thought that was quite harsh, didn't we? How pirates, were punished. How their hangings were done because it went under a different judicial system. And so listen to the Gallows Show, everybody, on more information on all of this in regards to hangings in particular, because although we're readdressing it, we're going to be moving on from that, but we're just sort of covering a few points that we covered on last week's show. So go back and have a little listen to that one if you missed it. Where are we? The public executions were carried outside Newgate in the lane known as the Old Bailey, hence where the name for the new criminal court building was called, because it comes from the lane, Old Bailey.
Of course.
And what was a Bailey?
A Bailey, I would call a hill.
So that goes back to an older time.
Yes, Motte and Bailey castles. I'm thinking of, sort of my historical sort of like interest, and the Bailey part. No, the Bailey part would be the actual raised part of the castle. That's what I'm thinking, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we talked about a dispute as to where the execution hangings were taking place. There is an actual dispute regarding where the gallows were actually erected outside of Newgate Prison. We know that they were there. We know it happened. We know they were public hangings. But where exactly they took place is in dispute. Some people say it's in one area, another. It's not none of them are far from each other, I would say, but the exact position is in dispute. It could be outside the debtor's door. Others say it's by the location. These days there's a fountain there that's supposed to be where the gallows took place, were positioned, sorry. So none of them are far from each other, but the exact position is in dispute.
Well, you could probably understand that, once the prison was demolished and the Old Bailey was built on top of it, people would sort of get a bit confused, perhaps, to know the exact spot. But as you say, they know the general area.
Well, I think one of the cases we looked at last week with the Michael Barrett, the Clerkenwell bomb outrage that he caused, that killed 7 people, it does state in that case that he was executed on the gallows in front of the debtor's door.
Yes, that's what I think it was.
That was like the mobile gallows, I think, wasn't it? They brought in for him.
Yeah.
And so it could have been anywhere, but they just wanted to do him at the debtor's door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so they moved it depending on what was going on in the time.
Yeah, and how many people turned up, maybe.
Yeah, they feel we've got a lot of people coming, you best move it back a bit or just move it a bit to the left.
Yeah, or this one's a high-profile criminal, we'll keep it closer to the prison.
Yeah, just in case things got out of hand.
Who knows? Yeah. Right. 3 women were actually burned at the stake in the Old Bailey for crimes of coining.
Ah, yes. I was actually a bit confused when I read this part of the research. I thought burnt at the stake because I was thinking sort of, medieval burning at the stake, but they were actually sort of hung first, weren't they? And then when they were sort of deceased would be actually burnt. Yes. They weren't actually burnt alive.
Not like you would imagine in some of the pictures where you see them alive but standing on a pyre. They were actually hung first and then burnt.
What is coining?
Coining is a term. Coins. It was back in the day when coins were actually made from precious metal, silver and gold. The value of the coin was by what it was actually made out of. And coining would be sort of like people would sort of like clip edges off the coins when you got them, which was illegal. That was a no-no because you'll be defacing a coin of the realm. But unscrupulous people would just clip a little bit off, and each coin that went through their hands, they'd clip a little bit off and a little bit off, and eventually you'd have a big pile of sort of silver or gold. But if you were caught doing that...
Wasn't it the Spanish that used to do that with their coins?
They had sort of like...
change. Rather than, say, for like, they had a 2p piece sort of thing and they needed a penny change, they'd cut the 2p in half.
Yeah, there was that. And that's slightly different because that was sort of like they had specific coinage which you could actually do that to. Yeah. But actually clipping a coin or coining, no, that was sort of like literally damaging a coin, just taking a bit off
Just taking a bit for the gold or whatever.
Yeah, just taking them, and eventually you would have enough to melt down and sell on.
Yeah, I get that, yeah. Okay.
Now, sessions as trials at the Old Bailey, as they were known. Now, that's interesting to me because they used to do sessions, didn't they, 8 times a year?
Yeah.
Right.
I think this is something a lot of people get confused with in this day because we're used to courts being convened sort of every day of the year, more or less. You have a court that's a working court, but back then you would have had circuit judges and stuff. A court would have gone round and, and everyone would have been tried in a big lump. So you could be held in a jail until the sessions actually commenced. And if you just missed the session that had gone, you could probably be languishing there for about 3 months before the new session started.
And now, this is when you enter a court and they shut the doors and everyone's in position, they go, the court is now in session. So that term has actually carried over into modern day times of how courts run, except like, that's actually the trial now that's called a session, whereas back then it was 8 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it was normal to sentence those found guilty of crimes other than murder in groups at the end of the trial day. So bring them in groups. All you lot are accused of shoplifting. What we're going to do here? So you didn't get an individual trial. You got, sometimes you did it in groups for the crime rather than individual. Did you do it or didn't you do it? It was like, right, you all did shoplifting. what are we going to do with you? Kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It sounds like one of those talent show things on the telly at the weekends, you know. Get you all in, now you're going home.
Because I think, they and they will do them in groups, but I think for the particularly high profiles like murderers and stuff like that, they would be sentenced individually at the end of their trial.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So if the more high profile crime it was, you tended to get your own little trial. Whereas if you were just one of the minor ones, you know, I mean, the 200 different ones. I mean, God, it must have been like busy session day. You know, it must have been exhausting. They would tend to do it in groups. So those sentenced to death for felony and not respited were commuted to transportation, were also hung in groups. So this is where you get the multiple executions at the time. And normally took 6 weeks after the so you know you're going to die, you know you're going to hang, you know you're going to hang in a group. You've got 6 weeks to wait.
That's right. I think, you know, this is something, you know, that is a long time to contemplate your forthcoming demise, isn't it?
It is, but the reason for this was the recorder of the Old Bailey had to prepare and present his report, looking just to see if anybody was going to be reprieved from the hanging conviction, and moved to transportation. Mm-hmm. And so,
because I think it would give time for the court, to file all the paperwork and stuff like that, and any appeals if they had such things, you know, and I can understand probably the time span now.
Mm. From July 1752, murderers had to be hanged within 2 days, so that wasn't too bad. But not on a Sunday.
Well, of course not.
Not on a Sunday. You didn't get hung on Sunday.
Only because the executioner wanted double time.
They were hung on a Monday, and usually they were separated from the ordinary felons. I love that. The ordinary felons. Murderer, you get your own room. And this continued to be used at Newgate for murderers up to 1880. Any old criminal could be could be hung on any day of the week.
Yeah, apparently Wednesdays were quite popular.
Mm.
Yeah, it's because there's nothing on the telly Wednesdays, so they thought, go down to the execution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Now, we covered all, the trials and tribulations of an actual trial, not a trial, an actual procession. Now, it was slightly different because it was right outside the jail, so basically they just brought out the gallows, the portable gallows that we talked about last week, with a team of horses. Now, this is where it really comes into focus. Now, any building that surrounded the area overlooking the gallows would hire out their rooms.
I know. And I was quite surprised the amount you could get.
I know. Back in that day, I mean, it don't sound a lot now. Yeah. £10 for a seat in a window overlooking the gallows. That's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is.
And wealthy people would pay this.
Oh, yeah. Because you'll be right up, a nice view, it's unobstructed. Yeah, I can see why people done it. But, yeah, this was actually quite common, even sort of back in the Tyburn days when they used to have the processions and along the streets. All these sort of like the upper sort of like shop fronts and stuff, and they would all hire out their rooms.
Yeah. Now, another thing I noticed was recently a poster's gone up on Facebook saying who removes their hats when a funeral procession passes by, and it's out of respect.
That's right.
For the deceased. But it's not actually where it originated from. Where this tradition originates from is actually the hanging times, where they used to wear hats. And if you had a big hat on, it would obstruct the view of people behind you. So when the prisoners were led up onto the gallows, there were shouts of hats off in the crowd. Not for respect, but because people would rather see. So they don't obstruct the view.
We're talking about like the 1800s, and this is when the top hat and the stovepipe hats were becoming fashionable, and we all know the top hats, and they can obstruct. You don't have to stand too far behind someone wearing one of them to have an obstructive view. So
Mm-hmm. Things you find out when you're researching various topics. I know, right? And I thought, God, that's really relevant, because I'd only just seen a post up on Facebook about this, and it was like,
Yeah.
I mean, not many people wear hats these days anyway, do they? Unless it's winter. But that's where that tradition comes from. Hats off. It's not out of respect. It's actually so you don't obstruct the view of a hanging, which I thought was awful, really. But there you go. Now, as I say, last week we spoke about, how they carried out the actual hanging. So go listen to that show if you want to know more. They did actually bind the dress of a female prisoner, just in case it floats up, just out of decency. Gosh, they give him one last decency.
You wouldn't want to be in the front row and blush, would you?
Certainly not. So you had a main executioner who would pull the lever, but then you would have one underneath, unseen by the crowd. So if they were struggling too long, he would hang on their legs. He would swing on their legs. So it sort of made, they didn't have a hard death, as it were, a hard...
Well, yeah, I mean, it was just just to quicken the process along.
Absolutely. But the bodies also left hanging for about an hour, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
That was the norm, to leave the body hanging for an hour. I think this sort of goes back, earlier times when they were literally just winched up, because sometimes it can take a good half hour for the victim to expire. So, and I think the hour sort of come from that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, execution broadsides were usually sold amongst the crowd. These are bits of paper, really. Oh, my God, I've got to put my teeth in today. To basically give last confessions of the condemned. And they're a bit like the tabloids, who's getting executed, why they're getting executed, anything that they've got to say about themselves. These were printed prior to the execution. But there was a lot of reprieve. So this is in the period before, we talked about the 6 weeks period or the 2-day period, depending on the crime. So they generally were quite out of date by the time the executions actually happened.
I have actually sort of read reports of this from other areas of hangings, and it was basically where the hack journalist was sort of born. They would sort of print these up and just sell them for a penny a time, and a lot of them were sort of made up or stuff like that, the prisoner's last confession. But as you said, Kerry, these would have been already printed up, they would have been printed up a couple of days before, so whether they would have been accurate accounts from the condemned is very, very doubtful. Quite sensationalised, I should imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're still up to the old tricks these days as well.
Well, yeah.
They certainly seem to be, don't they? The scaremongering or sensationalisation of things. Yeah, like you say, it's probably born from this time. But they, again, were tended to be for the wealthy. They were quite expensive. Printing back in those days was in its infancy, so they tended to be more for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Now, Newgate Prison itself used to get inspected quite a lot for its conditions. Now, this is where we start to see a huge discrepancy between accounts of treatment and conditions living in, inside Newgate Prison. Now, the Grand Jury of Middlesex actually inspected Newgate Prison, and they had quite a tour by the looks of it.
Well, yeah, I was looking at this, and they seem to have a good look round.
Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, they did, but they just examined everything, didn't they? And just to try and, as you said the other day, it was like the transition period from all the cramped and worse conditions going into more rehabilitation. So I think that's sort of where they wanted to go with that.
Mm. Well, to make sure that, the prison was actually acting in the best interest. But when you read the account, it's like a macabre tour. I mean, they were shown casts of heads of murderers taken after the execution, right?
Yeah.
And they say that some of them had terrible telltale depressions in the neck from where they were hung.
I think they were all depressed.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they didn't look too happy.
No.
They examined the complicated fastenings by ancient hangmen. So this is like past. They're like, this is almost like a history tour. It sounds like more than anything else. They were also shown the irons in which prisoners were formerly confined. So it's not actually much about what's going on in the prison now. So although they were inspecting Newgate Prison, it's almost like they were taken around a museum, a museum room.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're showing the irons, and this is where we locked them up, and this is where we flogged them, and they'll go, ooh, you can just imagine it.
They even showed him the irons that was worn by Jack Shepherd, in spite of the fact that he actually managed to escape.
Yeah, and he was actually hanged at Tyburn. So this is all before, they're seeing things that happened all before, not actually really much to do with the prison. I mean, I can imagine the scene. It's a bit like when you work in a company and the CEO of the company is coming down to inspect it, and for 2 days you do nothing but cleaning and tidying and
painting.
And on the day you're like in your best bib and tucker and looking spot on and very proficiently working at your your desk. I can imagine it was like that, because they inspected the cells and visited a room used as a kitchen. They were, taken through the route that the prisoners used to get to the actual gallows. They were taken to the chapel. Of course they were taken to the chapel. Then they were taken to a condemned cell, but it was dim and dreary enough to appall the stoutest heart. So that was approval, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
They went through the bleak passage, all the things that were supposed to be a deterrent. This is good. These are all good things. They don't want to see it too happy and bright and sunny, but they're not shown condition. They're shown things that have been sort of like sanitized for the inspection by the.
Yeah.
Well, from what it sounds like to me.
But when they went down this bleak passage, they were actually walking on the flagstones, and beneath of which were the bodies of the murdered, of the murderers that they had hung. Mm-hmm. And they were all sort of slowly being rotted away in the quicklime. So
I chuckled when it said in the research, it said that they were taken down the tunnels, and on the walls it was scratched. Their initials were rudely scratched upon the wall.
Yes.
It's like, really?
You've got to love the way they used to write things. They're rudely scratched.
Yes, how dare they mark the walls, on their way to their being to being hung? It's crazy. Yeah. See, graffiti is not a new thing, everybody. It was still going strong back in those days. A strong chair attracted their attention.
Because you need a strong chair.
It was used for when a convict was too faint to stand. So they used to put them on a chair to hang them.
They used to go through the trapdoor as well.
Yeah. Tied to the convict, so you didn't get away with it. And the chair obviously was survived for the next convict who couldn't stand up because he was so faint.
Well, it's obviously a strong chair. That's why it had to be a strong one.
Yeah. Right. And, They were glad to leave the dismal scene of this Newgate prison. And
so they didn't stay for lunch then?
No, they didn't stay for lunch.
Well, they didn't try the rope out?
No, they just had a good look around the sanitised version of Newgate, and then they entered their usual expression of approval in the visitors' book, and then they went on their merry way.
The visitors' book, yes. It's like when you visit like a museum or sort of something, like an attraction, and they usually have a visitor's book. I mean, what would you write in the visitor's book to Newgate Jail?
Time. Yeah, had a lovely time. Canteen was nice.
So
Saw some great death masks, absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Exactly what I want to see.
And the vista from the gallows was just lovely.
Went in with a group of 20, come out with a group of 25.
Yeah. Now, there were 567 public hangings, including those of 25 women between January of 1800 and May of 1868. And like we've said, you know, they drew huge crowds. Bodies of the executed for murder were taken to Surgeons' Hall in the Old Bailey, where they were publicly anatomised, so you could watch the body of a hung person being atomised, and or after 1834, the bodies of persons executed for crimes other than murder could actually be returned to the relatives, but you had to pay for that.
Yeah, yes. I think you had to pay for postage and packing.
Probably, yeah. Well, all bodies were properties of the Crown, weren't they? So it's probably, well, you paid a hangman, wouldn't you? Sort of, and that was the hangman's nice little bit of earner on the side, I should imagine.
That's right. Yeah,
a perk of the job.
Yeah, you do kind of start to see figures fall, because between the years of 1834 and 1836, there were only 2 confirmed executions at Newgate. Those were of John Smith and James Pratt, who were hanged for buggery. I hope that's a typo. Might not have been.
No, I can imagine they would carry out sentences back then for that sort of thing, but, well, hey-ho.
In 1836, only murderers were to be hung at Newgate, and their bodies were the ones buried in unmarked graves within the walls. 99 men and 8 women suffered this crime between 1837 and 1902.
Right, so that would have been up until the time Newgate ceased to be a prison there.
Yeah, it sort of takes it up to that.
I think out of that total, 58 men and 5 women were executed in private, though, between the 8th of September 1868 and the 6th of May 1902.
Mm-hmm.
And George Wolfe was the last person to be executed there.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite a sort of prestigious title to have, isn't it?
The last person to be hung at Newgate. On that note, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to have a look at the notorious executioners themselves.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
Welcome back. Now, before we had a quick rundown of the brief history of Newgate Prison, and now we're going to have a look at some of the executioners that worked out of Newgate. Absolutely. What kind of character? I mean, it must take a specific type of character to be able to do the job, you know?
It's like anything. You'd be surprised, the sort of jobs people are prepared to take on. I mean, and to be an executioner, well, there's obviously people prepared to do it, and you might as well have somebody willing to do it than somebody that isn't.
Absolutely. I think the money talked a lot as well.
Yeah, because I don't think it was their sole job. They would have other there'd probably be sort of like a prison guard as well during the day sort of thing, and that'd be their day job, but then they would be sequestered to do executions as well, and you'd be paid accordingly, I suppose.
I'm live.
How long?
An hour.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, they've got to be strong stomached at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's another time. It's something we sort of like in our modern sort of frame of reference would find hard to sort of like imagine, but sort of back then, an executioner was probably a perfectly legitimate sort of job to have, or part-time job, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't mind doing that job, but then I'd be like examining the head afterwards.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you?
Now,
that'd be interesting. Not every day you get to see inside someone's neck, is it?
Oh my lord. Anyway, the first one we know about is Edward Dennis. He did 201 hangings and the 3 burnings previously. He previously worked at Tyburn, so he sort of like came over to the new one. He came with them.
And he was relocated, a job relocation. Yeah.
Not
Well,
far.
not far though, was it? It's only
He
down
must have been happy about that. At least they didn't lay him off when they closed down Tyburn.
yeah.
No, this is this is true. Could have done. On the 9th of December on 1783, he and William Brunskill, who was like his little sidekick, hanged 9 men and 1 woman side by side on the New Drop at Newgate's first execution.
Yeah, we actually spoke about this last week, didn't we? The New Drop, which was not so much of a drop. It was sort of, they had a box, didn't they, or something, which they would stand the condemned on, and then the box would literally just sink into the ground about 18 inches and leave the condemned just sort of swinging.
Yeah, and then it went on to the long drop. So this is the New Drop. Okay, and they used to put white nightcaps. He used to put white caps over their faces so you didn't see the protruding tongues and bulging eyes.
How boring.
Well, that must have been, and you can see where sort of like the hoods actually come from now. I didn't realise it was they were using their nightcaps to actually do it originally. But that must have been something he obviously thought of.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's it. I mean, Dennis hanged 95 men and 1 woman. Elizabeth Taylor, apparently, burglary.
Poor old Liz.
Yeah.
Poor old Lizzie.
Didn't she write books and things?
She was a film star, wasn't she?
She was a film star, yeah.
Taylor, yeah.
Now, that was,
that
was actually in a really short period of time, between February and December, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's back in 1785.
20 men on one day. That was a Wednesday, everybody.
Oh, yes, I knew Wednesday was there somewhere.
Yeah, why not? He was actually succeeded by William Brunskill, who was his sidekick. He actually took over the job, and he hung, 537 people outside Newgate.
What, in one day?
That's only a weekend's work, isn't it, really?
In his time. Yeah, he also executed a further 68 at the Horsemonger Lane Jail. We talked about that earlier. So he outsourced as well. He didn't just do it there, he outsourced. But a lot of these executions, as you'll find, the figures we're giving you are just for Newgate, not in total. They used to travel out to, external jails.
He was a freelancer.
Yeah, did a bit of work on the side, he did.
Yeah.
Because he furthered, 68 he did.
Yeah.
In 4 years, that was.
Right.
Now...
that's just at Horsemonger's Lane, though, wasn't it?
That was in...
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So they travelled around as well as the courts. So, hey, great, right?
Yeah.
But when they did a triple hanging of Elizabeth Godfrey, John Holloway and Owen Haggerty. And this is actually quite tragic. This is the one that actually caught my eye because, again, how they know how many people had gathered, 40,000 they reckon on this particular hanging. And the 3 people were to be hung. But there was actual issue with the crowd. Now, I've seen this, and I've been part of a crowd crush in New Year's Eve when I went up to London one year to go up to the River Thames to watch the fireworks.
I'm not surprised because you're famous.
I know. Everyone was like, Kerry. I was like, no, not today. I'm like incognito with my dark glasses and my trilby hat. And it's incredibly scary when you get caught in a crush. You literally can't move. It's suffocating. And what had happened was the police had actually cordoned off one of the roads because it was getting too busy on the bank of the South Bank. So they cordoned off one of the roads. So everyone was still trying to pile in to get to the South Bank area. And where we'd been cordoned off to sort of allow the masses to sort of like spread out a bit, it was creating that crush. We saw that also, I think, wasn't it Hillsborough, the Hillsborough disaster?
Yeah,
that happened
well, yeah.
as well. And it's incredibly scary. Well, this is what happened and women, children and men were crushed and trampled as they fainted through not being able to breathe because of the crush, and then they died, so while this hanging is going on, you've got this other situation going on in the crowd as well. Now, because of the small amount, because it's outside of prison, they're not got the crowd control that they would have had at somewhere like Tyburn. It was impossible for the officials to actually do anything because it was so densely packed in. Now, the worst part of the crush was actually in a place called Green Arbour Lane, which is actually nearly opposite the debtor's door where the gallows were. So as they've been hung, the crowd surge, and it's caused this issue. Now, we talked earlier on about last week about the carnival atmosphere and the amount of people that were, selling their wares, as it were.
Yeah.
And a pie seller had placed his basket of piles on a stall, was pushed over, and this actually made the situation worse.
Oh, yes, because
they'll be scrabbling for the free food now.
No, they're tripping over.
They're tripping over his basket, weren't they?
Yeah, so this caused more people to fall over and be trampled to death. Now, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Harrington, who had gone to watch the hangings with his father, was killed. His father survived. All the survivors and the people that were injured took to St Bartholomew's Hospital. But this is where it becomes a bit more, oh my God, it got serious now because, a woman died who was nursing a baby, but she managed to pass her baby over the heads, of the crowd. They were passing the baby along, sort of like concert style. The baby survived, but the woman died. A cart, because they used to pull up carts so people could get a higher view against walls, that collapsed. People died in the panic of that collapse. You can imagine it was absolute mayhem.
It just is like a train of events, isn't it?
Isn't it?
The pie sellers' pies go over, and then the cart collapses.
It's like what was that movie? The one with the big accidents at the beginning of it. You know the one I mean? It was like death chased everyone that survived.
Oh gosh, what was that called?
Well, it's another one of Paul's movies.
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's a horror movie.
It's probably something obscure.
It was the first one. Was an aeroplane exploded, and one of the passengers sort of see it in a vision, and he created. So they all some of them got kicked off, and then obviously the aeroplane blew up, and then a little bit later, death started to chase them down and kill them one by one.
It's a series of movies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Can I think of what it's called?
Well, perhaps if anyone's listening, they can head over to the Paranormal Concept website and drop us a line, and get in contact with us over at paranormalconcept.com.
Yeah.
Oh, God. That's going to bug me now. Quickly, Paul, have a quick Google while we
Final Destination.
That's the one.
Final Destination.
That's
it.
the one. It was right on the tip of my tongue, that
yeah,
was. Goodness
it's
me.
Final Destination, the medieval period.
Medieval. Oh, dear. Now, they could only get to sort this issue out after the three murderers had been taken down and the crowds had started to clear from behind. It's done and dusted now. Everyone's starting to drift off. And so it was only sort of at that point they could then start looking at what, the casualties that were there. In total, there were 27 bodies and 70 or so casualties. But you can imagine there was like hats and belongings all over the place of the dead and the injured. Now, a temporary mortuary was set up at St Bart's to enable the relatives to come and identify their loved ones. So, yeah, it was horrible.
Mm. Yeah, it couldn't have been, we sort of had a bit of a sort of like made a bit light of it, but no, that is quite a major sort of like tragedy, isn't it? Right in the heart of London.
Exactly, and I think we saw the psychological impact of an event like that, as I say, in a more modern day event of this kind with the Hillsborough disaster. It was Hillsborough, wasn't it, where they died by crushing?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
Football match. Yeah.
We saw the psychological impact on the masses from that, so you can imagine
I've
had
actually
a similar.
I've actually been privileged to read the documentation that came from the witness statements of the St John ambulance that was in attendance there, and even just by reading some of that, because obviously they were tending to people and trying to get their ambulances in and things like that. It was just horrendous. Really was.
Yeah.
You could almost feel the frustration that they were having as much as the concern and everything was all coming across. So I do believe they are online as well now, that you can actually, they've been sort of declassified or whatever you call it. So you can actually read them now. But
you should be able to, because they've had the inquiry now, haven't they? So that should be made public.
I'm sure the St John paperwork for it is online. But it's horrendous.
Well, on this occasion, it's not clear what action was taken by the authorities to prevent a reoccurrence of this tragedy. But going on modern day example, I can't imagine it being much different to the impact it would have had back then. Either it's an incredibly scary situation if you find yourself in that situation. You literally can't get out, you can't move, and it is horrible. So the fact that this is happening at a hanging is sort of double macabre, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
John Langley then took over in 1814. He hanged. God, I can't stop saying it now. He hanged 37 men and 3 women in his 3 years in office. James Botting took over from him in 1817. He was there for 2 years. He was known as Jemmy, which is a little bit like, hey, Jemmy.
Jemmy?
Jemmy. Just good old Jemmy's on shift today. Hanged 42 men and 2 women during his 2-year tenure. And in his tenure of hangings, 1818, the shoplifting was actually removed from the list of capital crimes.
Well, that's a relief.
So shoplifting was actually removed from the list of felonies. So that's quite good to know. In 1819, James Foxon assumed the position, but it already helped James Botting, so he had a pretty good, training session, I would say.
Yeah.
He hung 207 men and 6 women over 11 years. So I think we're starting to see is starting to drop. The amount of people that are actually being hung is actually starting to drop.
Yeah, it's probably sort of like the social sort of like awareness of the time and stuff like that. Yeah, and
the fact they've sort of taken that sort of punishment from petty theft. As well, so
the statutes have been changed, and they're sort of probably this is probably the start of seeking sort of punishment to fit the crime sort of thing.
Maybe, yeah. Now the 5 Cato Street conspirators actually were the last to hang and beheaded, so they weren't just hung; they were beheaded as well. In 1820 for conspiring to murder several members of the cabinet.
Oh right.
And he was assisted by Thomas Cheshire, because it was so high profile.
Well, yeah, I suppose, if there's a high profile one like that, and I suppose they're expecting a lot of people and probably trouble, probably even if these are conspirators to some sort of plot, they may have sort of sympathisers in the crowd and stuff like that. So I should imagine they took a lot of precautions with that one.
Yeah, definitely. Now, who cut their head off is a big secret. He was unnamed and, as they kept very secret of who actually chopped their heads off. But the execution was actually done by Foxon and Cheshire.
Right.
Now, Thomas Cheshire, took over, and he was known as the Old Cheese. I love that.
The Old Cheese.
And he was the principal of a quadruple hanging in 1829 of 3 highway robbers and 1 man convicted of stealing in a dwelling house.
Again, I love the language. Stealing in a dwelling house. I should imagine that's probably a hotel of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Probably sounds like it, doesn't it? A dwelling house.
Yeah.
Well, a dwelling house, didn't they like hire rooms out?
Yeah, he probably stole the towels or something, or the little bars of soap you get.
Yeah.
Oh my lord. Oh dear. But by now the gallows were actually modified and they only had one beam with a capacity for 6 people. So they sort of cut down the amount of room on the gallows. Gosh.
Yeah.
Now,
Eked it out through the whole day as opposed to all at once.
yeah, in 1820, so James Foxton is still the chief executor here. There were 42 executions on 7 hanging days at Newgate. None of these were for murder. 12 were for uttering forged notes. We were uttering forged notes.
Yeah, distributing. Oh, I love that word. I did actually look that up earlier. I thought, what exactly does uttering forged notes mean? And it is, sort of passing off, forged notes. But a great word. Love it.
Going back to them, that era wasn't like the notes, just like white bits of paper with £5 written on it.
Yeah, literally sort of a load of sort of writing on it. And, with the introduction of banknotes, which would have been around this time, sort of forgers had a bit of a field day.
Yeah.
Yep, they certainly did. 12 were for robbery or burglary and 5 were for highway robbery. Now, around the 1820s, murderers, rapists, arsonists, forgers, coiners and highwaymen were virtually always executed.
Right, so now we're sort of starting to see a real sort of closing the gap, isn't it? I mean, it's literally those capital crimes, and I think we can safely say, even though perhaps some of the lesser crimes still carried the death penalty, they would have all been commuted. I'm sure they would.
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But the numbers are still dropping, aren't they? You know, you're starting to see less and less people actually being hung. And the largest multiple execution in 1820 was actually of 8 men. And the smallest was of 3 men. So, you know.
Oh, okay.
But again, they were for the more serious crimes. In 1829, William Calcraft carried out 86 executions. His first job being the hanging of the hated murderer, Esther Hibner.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, before he took this position, he used to sell pies at the hangings.
Oh, right.
He wasn't the pie man that got.
He wasn't responsible for that riot or that sort of. Yeah.
Oh, who knows? I doubt it.
I should imagine he must have sort of like got to know the people and sort of like that officiated at the hangings and probably sort of made his way. You know, I think perhaps they say, the pie man sort of give us a job.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Pizzas, let's have a go at someone's neck.
Yeah. He got to hang a total of 86 people, including 6 women, and retired in 1872. Now, one of his most famous cases was Francis Courvoisier, sounds like a brandy, who had murdered his master. And another was Britain's first railway murderer, Franz Muller. So he had a couple of high-profile ones, really.
Yeah. So.
Now, basically, we then, I just find it incredible that you used to be a pie seller and now you're an executioner. And like I say, it really does call into mind the mentality of these people. It's just a form of, if you've got to be very hardened emotionally to deal with doing that to somebody, or are they
look at Sweeney Todd? Sweeney Todd was the executioner, and his missus downstairs was the pie maker, wasn't she?
Well, yeah, it's a bit different though, but it's I mean, again, as I sort of said earlier, it's we're looking at and we're framed in our own sort of time frame on our own understanding, our own thoughts and feelings and the way we've been brought up. But back then, it was an everyday occurrence, and you got hung for this and that. it would have been accepted.
Mm.
You know,
they probably see it and thought, "Oh, no, I can do that. That's easy money. All we've got to do is like pull a lever."
Well, Calcraft was also responsible for carrying out floggings at Newgate. So, other forms of, say torture, other forms of punishment were carried out, flogging being one of them. And he was actually paid an additional salary for that.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can imagine he was probably a bit skint. I'm a bit skint this month. Can we have some more floggings, please?
Yeah, I mean, maybe he was just a victim of crime himself. And he just thought, yeah, I'll have some of that, get my own back.
Or maybe he would have been a hardened criminal himself and he just took a delight in doing it. Any of these executioners, it could be they had that hardened criminal sort of mindset, so it made them perfect for the job.
Well, perhaps, sort of being a former pie seller, perhaps that was a tough job back in the day, and it sort of was the right qualification. Who knows? But
we did briefly in research, didn't link to Newgate, obviously, or the gallows, but we were looking at Albert Pierpoint, who was the executioner up to quite recent times, really, wasn't he? He was the Crown's executioner, did the Nuremberg trial hangings and stuff like that. And he was a really, his family said he was a very soft and gentle man. He wasn't a hardened criminal kind of person at all. He was actually a very soft and gentle man and liked fishing.
Yes, I mean, there are several interviews of him if you go over to YouTube. I mean, he was giving interviews right up until the early 80s. So, and he is quite a mild-mannered sort of, just looks like, your granddad.
Yeah. Oh, Marley's agreeing with that.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the black shucks off.
It's always about this
you've
time.
Got the gold star this week.
Well done, Marley. Now be quiet, please. Now, proper condemned cells have been constructed in Newgate during the early 1830s, created by knocking two ordinary cells into one and ending the use of the condemned hold, which was the dark vetted dungeon place that they were. Now, condemned prisoners were guarded around the clock, 2 or 3 warders to prevent suicides. They didn't let them commit suicide. And when they took their exercise, they were exercised in a covered walkway known as Birdcage Walk or Dead Man's Walk.
It's hard to see a dead man's walk. You can understand that, can't you? Sort of like the gallows and humour coming out there, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. They still need their exercise.
Yeah, got to keep them fit and healthy for their hanging.
Yeah.
In 1872, William Marwood was the next one. He officiated for 17 executions and assisted by George Incher. And he hanged the 4 Lenny mutineers for murder and mutiny. And this was Newgate's only quadruple private execution.
Oh, okay. So this must have been after the time it was sort of moved behind the prison walls then.
That's right, yeah. That's right. Now, there are loads and loads. I mean, we could go on and on about different ones, in all honesty. So you've got Bartholomew Binns, James Billington, loads and loads of different executioners passed through. Now, one thing that was quite interesting was James Billington. Now, he hanged 24 men and 3 women. Now, he also executed the infamous baby farmer, Amelia Dyer.
Oh, right, yes.
Right, now, Amelia Dyer, we know on the Paranormal Investigation team from the True Crimes Museum, don't we, Paul?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. We've spoken to her.
Yeah, she comes up sort of like Lot and I sort of know of her as well.
Because they've got her bodice down at the True Crimes Museum that we've investigated. And we've got some good voice interaction through the SB7.
Oh, was that down in Hastings on the south coast?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's the one.
Now, she was actually paid to look after unwanted babies, but she would drown the babies in the Thames and other rivers, but still managed to keep the income, basically. So she took her final stroll down Dead Man's Walk. Now, this is an alleged story. She allegedly passed a young warder named of Mr. Scott, and as she stopped, she turned towards him and said, "I'll meet you again someday, sir." And then she got hung. Right, now, Scott carried on in his chosen career, but those words and the way she said it to him and the way she looked at him kind of stuck with him. I would imagine certain people would have stuck with you.
Yeah, sort of, especially someone of that notoriety, because he certainly would have known exactly and who she was and what she had done. So, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Scott one night in the prison was alone in the warder's room, and he was looking out onto Dead Man's Vault. And all of a sudden, he had a cold shiver and got the distinct impression that someone's watching him. And then he says he heard a low, sneering rasp. The voice was unmistakable of Mrs. Dyer, and said, "Meet you again, meet you again."
Oh, spooky.
Interesting.
He saw her face grinning at him through the grill. Now, brave guy, he ran towards this apparition.
Oh, okay.
And she promptly vanished. So he threw the door open, but the passageway was empty. So, did he imagine it? But they reckon that just at that moment, a woman's handkerchief fluttered to the flagstones and lay still by his feet.
Classic story, isn't it?
I know, it's a duff moment.
It's a classic ghostly tale.
Yeah.
Whether there's any truth to it or not, you don't know. But, that's a classic sort of, because I think these sort of stories are sort of like the modern folk tales, aren't they? These sort of stories. There's probably, if you strip it back, there's probably some sort of subliminal meaning behind it. But no, I like it.
I know.
Well, it says there that there was another one of his famous customers was Thomas Neal Cream, who in December 1892... as he was ready to be hung, said the words, "I am Jack the," and as he got to that bit, he fell, and obviously was hung. But obviously, in reality, he couldn't have been Jack the Ripper. But he was almost there, about to say that I think that he was Jack the Ripper.
Again,
he just wanted a bit of fame.
Again, I do like these anecdotal stories. I mean, this is what makes sort of like this sort of area, sort of like the paranormal, quite sort of interesting to be in, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, going back to the Amelia Dyer story, there's no date, there's no, you know what I mean? It doesn't say what date it's on. It doesn't give you any more information on who Mr. Scott was. And, it doesn't... It's urban legend. It's the traditional ghost story, isn't it?
Yes,
it is, isn't it?
It is the classic.
But I think if he went through that, the last thing on his mind was to write down what the date and time was.
Well, this is true. I couldn't find the date and the time and all those details that you want.
He should have checked the CCTV, and that would have date snapped it, wouldn't it?
Deary me, yeah, very true, very true. Now, we did find one other story, which was of the Black Shuck. There's supposed to be it's another urban legend about a sorcerer that got imprisoned at Newgate. And at this time, the conditions in the prison were absolutely appalling. And some of the inmates had turned to cannibalism. And because this sorcerer, I'm air quoting all the time with that word, sorcerer, was not big and burly. He was a bit of a, what we these days would probably call him a nerd. He's a
nerdy sorcerer.
A nerdy sorcerer. He sort of got succumbed to cannibalism. The other inmates ate him. But just as he ate them, he said, "I'll get my revenge on you." And then the next thing you know, that these inmates will die of fright from seeing the Black Shuck. So there we did find that story. But I am going to put a disclaimer out there. The only source of that story I could find was on Wikipedia.
Ah, yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Right, which is why I haven't included it in the research, but I thought it's worthy of mention because I did find a reference to it. But urban legend, myth, whatever you want to call it, it was totally unverified, and I only found it in one source. So, good old story, that one. Now, the appalling conditions at Newgate are renowned, right?
Yeah.
It's been noted and throughout its history, and that's what it was notorious for.
Exactly. It was said The prison was saying, "Oh, this is horrible. This is absolutely horrific."
Absolutely. Yeah.
That it was so dirty that the floors crunched as you walked due to the lice and bed bugs.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Although the women's area was equally appalling, crowded with half-naked women, most of them drunk and deranged in leg irons, often with their children in tow.
And that sounds like a pub I used to go down.
I can imagine that's horrendous, right?
Oh, I know, right? Approximately 30 people died there every year. Physicians didn't go there. They would go, "No, I ain't going there." And as people walked past it, they would hold their noses because it was so smelly.
And they had to wipe their feet when they left the place.
Oh, would you imagine that they had to have a full-blown, like, what's the word? Full-blown cleanse after they left there. Burn my clothes, just wash them.
Yeah, you would need a bit, and you'll probably need a bit more than just the hand sanitizer as you come out of there.
Yeah, just a little bit, right?
Full body wash.
Oh, my goodness me. It is absolutely horrendous when you start looking into some cases that were there. It was notorious for its overcrowding and unhealthy environment. There was not enough air, so the openings for the bars at the window weren't big enough. Not enough water. There were regular epidemics, were outbreaks were in there. Newgate did not supply prisoners with bedding and clothes. These had to be purchased from the keeper. So if you've got no money, you can't, provide yourself with anything extra to what you go in there with. Prisoners,
you were really at the mercy of either your relatives, if you had any, that would sort of like provide you with anything, and even food, I should imagine. Or if you did have a bit of money sort of put away. So.
Well, it's like I said at the beginning, it's ironic because it's a debtor's prison to start with. I know that other crimes are put in there, but, if you have to pay for bedding and clothing, you had to pay a fee upon admission. Then if you wanted to get out, if you were released, you then had to pay to be released. You don't stand much of a chance, do you, really?
No, I can't. And to us today, it sounds, I just can't see. And there must have been people in there all their lives then, if they sort of, were convicted of something, the right poorest of the poor.
Exactly. Now, the ordinaries, they were called the ordinaries of Newgate, would actually publish accounts of the lives of those who passed through the prison, such as the crimes that were committed, previous convictions, trial information, the life leading up to the stay in Newgate, as well as a description of the sorts of punishments that individuals suffered. So, and it's actually because of these that Newgate Prison has actually got the most well documented of the 18th century in England. So it's actually thanks to these ordinaries that we have this knowledge now of how bad this prison was.
Yeah. Right, yeah, because I've often sort of like heard, that Newgate was really bad, but you often think, well, are these just sort of, stories to beef the place up a bit? But, it's obviously got the documentation for it, so.
Yeah, very much so. They were that bad in the early part of the 19th century. Great prison reformers such as John Howard and Elizabeth Fry tried to improve things. She was shocked. But I read an account somewhere, I can't remember now where, they used to do tours. You could actually pay to go and view the prison.
Yeah.
You could actually pay just to go and have a look. It was like a day out.
Yeah, that was quite common, and I've heard about that, and not just Newgate, any sort of place where people were incarcerated. Yes, that would be, again, the prison sort of warders, that would just be an income for them, a bit extra.
So, Elizabeth Fry actually visited the prison in 1816, and she found the place crowded with half-naked women and their children. They were typically waiting for transfer to the prison ships that would take them to the colonies. Now, most of the ordinary prisoners were drunk. Due to the availability of cheap gin, well, I have to say, if I'm in a place like that, better to be drunk than sober, right?
Well, yeah, I think I'd take up drinking, if I went in there, yeah.
Yeah, and if they couldn't afford to pay the keeper of Newgate for easement, then they were in leg irons. You know, so she actually formed the Association for the Improvement of the Female Prisoners in Newgate. That's a mouthful. And actually set up a school within the prison for the younger children.
Oh, yeah. And that's another thing you don't realise, is it? I mean, a lot of these women would have had children, and probably some of them would have had children whilst they were in there. I mean, of course, we're, you know, sort of prison guards and other sort of male inmates and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it is a totally different sort of like view of incarceration than what we have today.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. But thanks to her, things started to get better. And the prison started to improve somewhat.
Yeah, she said she gave evidence to the parliamentary committee on her findings, and she was able to get a proper matron appointed to look after the women, like the health-wise and conditions slowly improved.
Yeah.
So, you know, prisoners under sentence of death were kept shackled, and apart from other prisoners, like other than murderers, they were like fed on bread and water for the final 2 or 3 days of their miserable lives.
Oh, right.
Amen.
Yeah. So if you want to visit Newgate Prison, you can't. It's not there anymore, as we said earlier on. It got knocked down to make way for the Old Bailey, and that actually stands on the site of Old Newgate Prison. But if you venture around the back to Amon Court, you will find the only surviving wall of Newgate Prison. Now, the whole point of this show is a paranormal show, not a pure history show. So obviously we can't go much further without talking about hauntings. Now, Newgate was actually haunted by several ghosts, apparently, allegedly. We've already talked about Amelia Dyer in the prison. Footsteps were also reported along Dead Man's Walk late at night. One warder reported seeing the face of a decaying hanged man in a cell. And others reported seeing an aging female form, in the yard. Now, the Old Bailey itself is supposed to be haunted.
Oh, right, yeah, we were talking about this the other night, weren't we, when we were sort of like talking about this show, and obviously the site of the prison's not there anymore, but sort of the Old Bailey being built directly on top, you can sort of possibly sort of account the hauntings at the Old Bailey to earlier times when Newgate was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it? Because we don't know. It's very shadowy, apparently, this ghost. It's hard to tell if it's a male or female. It appears as sort of... It's like mist. It's like a mist. It's like the infamous, you know...
If you think, like a court building, and even, you know, it's been there for, you know, the... sort of, what's it, over 100 years or so now. I mean, you would think perhaps that not many people would actually die in there, would they?
Not in the Old Bailey, but obviously where Newgate is, it's been built on top of it.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But
if there was hauntings and they don't recognise new builds, so like they pass through walls or pass, you know, where doorways were supposed to have been, if they were haunting Newgate, why would they then stop just because it's the Old Bailey? Surely the hauntings are still happening, but they'll be happening inside the Old Bailey instead. But we didn't find that crossover.
Well, then also you could have like the people executed outside, and obviously they could go into the Old Bailey and haunt the Old Bailey if that was where they were condemned.
This is something we was actually sort of talking about in last week's show about the gallows. I mean, these places were places of such sort of like trauma and stuff. I mean, it seems to kick the trend, and even with Newgate, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot reported there.
Not really. Not what you would expect.
It's like Tyburn, you know, which is, a Marble Arch now. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's not a lot reported there either.
No, there isn't. Well, but they are incredibly busy areas, even, you know, on the busy days. So it may well happen, and we just aren't aware of it. Because, you know, we talk about hauntings at night. You know, you've got to be a nighttime investigation because everything's quiet and you stand more chance of seeing it. It could be happening on a daily basis. Just, it's so busy. People just aren't seeing it. They're just not recognising it.
Well, yeah.
It is, you know. We were talking the other night, weren't we, about how most most activity or most paranormal happenings happen when you're least expecting it, not when you're actually going out looking for it.
Oh, that's right.
That's my sort of like with my encounter. That was that would have been around about 3:00 in the afternoon. Sort of when I was down in mind you, I wasn't in an indoor sort of like tunnelled area, but if anything, I think sort of documented sort of evidence. I mean, most sort of paranormal events do actually happen during the daylight hours.
So, who knows? I mean, but I didn't come across any time slip episodes going back to this time or anything like that in relation to this time period of hangings or Newgate Prison in particular. So, it does build a question. But one thing I did find out when I was looking at this, directly opposite where Newgate would have been, so directly opposite the street from Old Newgate Prison, is the Viaduct Tavern, which still stands to this day and is investigated.
Yeah,
that's right. Have you been to the Viaduct Tavern, Paul?
No, I haven't. I have been told about it, but because it's a pub, I don't like investigating pubs because obviously they want to stay open as long as they can to earn their money. So by the time they've closed and everything, you've got like an hour to do your investigation.
Yeah.
But no, I mean it's supposed to be quite active there, and isn't it like where apparently Jack the Ripper used to pick his victims from?
Again,
allegedly,
because there's the Five Bells as well, isn't there? More in the East End that he was supposed to frequent as well. Now, the Viaduct Tavern itself was actually built in 1869. On a side note, if you are actually interested in investigating the Viaduct Tavern, then check out the City of London Paranormal team, because I believe that they do investigations at the Viaduct. So, just for your reference, if you fancy going along to one of the investigations there. Now, this is one of those places where you'd have rooms that overlooked the hangings.
Yeah.
Oh, right, the £10, the £10 rooms, yeah?
Yeah. From every window within the viaduct, you can see, you would have been able to have seen the site. And
so it's a bit more expensive than £10 a room now, though.
I should imagine so. West End prices.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Now, there was allegedly another prison, Old Giltspurt Street Compter, which once existed in the tavern's general vicinity. And that jail was, again, a debtor's prison, but that was demolished in the 1850s.
Oh, right, yeah. So it's pretty much sort of believed that that is nothing to do with Newgate, because I have sort of heard sort of stories again, and anecdotal stories, sort of that they were part of the holding cells for Newgate, but I think it's more or less been sort of proved or sort of discussed that it's not.
No.
Some believe that the Viaduct Tavern was literally built on top of that, because they've got some prison cells underneath the tavern.
Yeah. Well, they say that they're prison cells. They're not. That has been proved without doubt that they're not.
Oh, right.
Cells. Some say that these rooms in the basement are actually from Newgate prison cells, but they're not.
Right, yeah. That's a story I've sort of heard, yeah. And,
because it wasn't complete. Newgate itself wasn't completely demolished until 1902, and the Viaduct Tavern was built in 1869.
Yeah.
And why would they have extended beyond the wall? Because there are pictures. You can actually find pictures of the positioning of Newgate Prison and the Viaduct Tavern. They wouldn't have extended subterraneanly out with cells under the ground. They wouldn't have done that. It would all have been enclosed within Newgate. So that.
But then, if they've got a mobile gallows, so they could, if they had someone highbrow sort of executed, they could have moved the execution over to that way, and they could put the prisoner in that cell, so he didn't have too far to walk to the gallows.
No, I don't think. I think that's a stretch. That's my opinion. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to remember, this is quite a big tavern, and it was one of the most well-known gin palaces. And in fact, actually, if you go to the tavern, there's still some original features from that time period there. It was very, very rough, this pub. So that what you would do, if you wanted to drink, you'd have to go to like a booth and buy a token, a drinks token, and then take the token to the bar to get your drink.
Yeah,
so the bar staff didn't deal with money. It was all done sort of like enclosed in this booth. And that's still there, apparently.
Okay.
Oh, right. It's certainly a place we'll have to visit. We'll have to get in contact with our friends from, was it City of London Paranormal?
Yeah,
perhaps?
City of London Paranormal. And it's I say, I think this is an incredibly interesting location. I mean, the first floor used to be an opium den as well. Back in Deer, when opium was, you used to have opium dens.
Yeah.
Up there, where people used to go and smoke opium and get out their little skulls and do whatever they did when they were on opium. So it's a notorious pub in London that's still standing, has original features. And, you know, if we think about atmosphere and it's, you know, that's soaking into the building itself, this is probably one of those places where you can really feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should imagine. Yeah, certainly. I've heard people talk about it, and they have sort of like conveyed that sort of idea about it. Well, it's very popular on, you know, sort of like a lot of people want to go there and investigate. So it must have some sort of allure to it.
Most definitely, I'd say it's definitely one on my bucket list. The Viaduct Tavern.
I mean, it must certainly look the part.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'd rather go down there to have a look around as opposed to investigate it.
You just want to go and have a drink.
Well, it's that too. But there's plenty of other pubs that claim to be the most haunted in London. You know, there's a pub that my dad knows. When I was a kid, he used to go up to London all the time, and every time we passed it, it's like, that's the most haunted pub in London. Never remembered what it was called, but...
But there are, I mean, I have to say, in London, you know, in particular, the pubs, the old gin palaces, all right, they're not necessarily in their original condition, but you can tell which were gin palaces. You can, definitely can get the vibe of knowing what it was when you enter one. There's one outside Covent Garden, just on the river, that we went. I can't bloody remember the name of it. That we went into, and it was an old gin palace. You could tell it would have been one of the old gin palaces. Gin being like the most cheapest spirit you could get in the day.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, nowadays it's had a resurgence of popularity with the flavoured gins and the pink gins and all that. It's now a very popular drink again. But at one point it was like it was the cheapest liquor you could get, and it was called Mother's Ruin, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. Yeah, Mother's Ruin. Yeah, Squareface, I think soldiers used to call it, because they used to come in square bottles or something. So yeah, it was certainly one drink for the masses. I mean, the working classes, and they took to it. You know, they really did take to it and knock it back.
Well, they kind of took to the opium too, I would say, as well. You know, I think what I would like to do is actually. I agree with Paul. You know, I'd like to investigate it, but I would like to just go and look at it, you know, and have access to the upper floors, you know, and not just the pub area, but go down and have a look. But again, you know, according to the Museum of London Archaeology, the pub wasn't on the site of Compter, the other prison that it's supposed to be the cells of. It wasn't anything to do with Newgate. They say it was just storage rooms for beer barrels and liquor. And a lot of places do have a beer cellar. I mean, I've worked in plenty of pubs and they still have beer cellars. You know, it's cool down there. You can get all your machinery. You can keep it cold down there. All the pipe work goes down there. You know what I mean? It's that, and they are creepy places. I'm not going to sit here and pretend any different. They are creepy old places, beer cellars.
But again, it's, you know, the classic, I mean, what has more allure, the prison cells or cellar? But it's usually the case, the most straightforward explanation is probably the right one.
Mm-hmm. But this is a theory that they are the cells of Newgate Prison or the cells of this compter, banded around in the paranormal field time and time again. So this has been looked at. It has been thoroughly debunked, and we need, as a field, to be more aware of things like this, and not just take a story that's been regurgitated time and time again, and actually think about things more logically.
Well, yeah, because these sort of places have been looked upon by people a lot more highly qualified than ourselves. Experts in their fields, archaeologists, historians and stuff, and you have, and even if it doesn't fit what you would like it to be, you have to accept it.
You kind of do, yeah, you kind of do. And we find this quite a lot in the paranormal field, don't we, where, last couple of weeks we've looked quite extensively at historical references, and we've looked at, history has a great part in the paranormal field. You can't really do investigating without looking at the history, don't we agree?
Well, yes, it certainly goes hand in hand. I mean, that's the first port of call if you sort of looking into a place. It's the history, and it's when you're trying to match up. Most people, if they're trying to match up an alleged encounter or alleged bit of paranormal activity, you look at the history to try and match it up to a certain event.
I do think sometimes, though, it's almost like Chinese whispers, because, coming from like an events company's point of view, you obviously want to sell your tickets. So you look at some of these rumours and you can put allegedly the site of blah, 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 and try and big it up to the customers. Mm. And then because you've said that, it's almost like they forget the word allegedly and jump to the conclusion that it is definitely that.
So do you think there's a link between the propaganda of an alleged haunting and the activity that's happened? So are we creating the activity out of belief of some of these urban legends, myths and stories?
I sort of think that is quite possibly the correct sort of answer to this. Because quite clearly some places are known not to have been the sort of places they are purported to have been, and the people that are going are sort of reporting stuff from the fictitious account. And if this stuff is actually happening, then surely the most common agent in that is the individual that goes there with that belief.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And people put it down to always the famous case, or the famous person. We've talked about Anne Boleyn before now. She's She's a very busy ghost. She's prolific, is old Anne Boleyn, in several different locations. But is it Anne Boleyn, or are we jumping to the assumption it's someone like Anne Boleyn because she just happens to be the famous name linked to the location?
That's what I'm sure a lot of sort of these sort of ghosts who are said to be of certain people even, or and let alone in historical people, you don't know. You don't know who they are.
No. I know, Paul, when you're investigating, you ask one of the questions of who's the king or queen.
Yeah, I like to try and pinpoint times and dates for that reason. So if you get someone, come through on the board, for example, like Amelia Dyer, for example, I know that's a real genuine person, and I can go back and look at the time she was born, the time she died, and if I asked on the board what was the name of the king or queen on the throne, and just record what they say, I can then go check back to see whether or not it is actually the right answer
at the time period. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're sort of securing that little bit of information. But when you get, I've been on an investigation. It was at Coalhouse Fort, I think it was. There used to be a team that run the location, and when you'd walk around the tunnels, they'd tell you beforehand that there's a spirit of old John or whatever, and he'll follow you around and pinch your bum and things like that. I know a few investigators that would love that. But anyway, so when you're walking around these tunnels, you do start hearing footsteps. And I was at the back of the line one particular time, and the bloke was like, "Can you hear that?" I was like, "No." A couple of other people said, "Yeah," and I was like, "It's just the echo of our footsteps as we're walking around." And he's like, "Oh no, that's the ghost of old John. That is, he's coming up behind us all, and yeah, he's getting ready to pinch someone." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, whatever." So not buying this. as I push my way to the front. No, I'm joking. But you know, sometimes you are led into believing that it could be something it's not, and people do jump to the conclusions, especially if it's a famous person like Anne Boleyn or whatever, for example. But I like to try and get confirmation of times and dates, so I can go back and research that, so I can see whether or not it all ties in.
I think that's all you can really do, is just try and garner basic information. And but you know, my sort of view on it, I don't believe we're actually dealing with sort of spirits of the deceased. I believe it's just the way it's interpreted to us, or we are interpreting it. It's the way it presents itself for us to understand. But that's probably another show in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, we've actually come to the end of the show for today. Now, next week, we're taking a completely U-turn. We're going in a completely different direction next week. We're bringing a different topic to you next week. A lot more conceptual. And very spiritual next week, because we're going to be talking. Now, this comes off the back of something that Paul watched. He found a documentary or something on it, and it was called The Cosmic Egg. And it's a very spiritual, tried to be backed up by science kind of theology, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, it was like talking about different aspects of this cosmic egg, and the shape is found in so many different areas of the paranormal, but it's also found in even the human body. You know, you in the brain, you've got two egg-shaped organs, for want of a better word, I don't know.
Right.
But I'll have to research it, ready for the next week's show. But the theory was that they were given to us by aliens, and that's where we had that evolutionary jump.
So that's what we're looking at next week. So a complete different topic for you guys next week. See what you make of that one. On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show, my beautiful men.
That's gone so quick.
That has gone really quick. Thoroughly enjoyed that one.
Yeah. I'm just hoping that the audience of Paranormal UK Radio are really enjoying what we're bringing to them. And don't forget, if you want to get in contact with us, we are on Facebook, Paranormal Concept Show, or we have a website, paranormalconcept.org. No, .com. We changed. Yeah. It's a .com now, not a .org. And we are exclusive to Paranormal UK Radio Network. So,
and before we go, I also want to say that we do have a book out as well.
Yeah, this is something we did on our old network.
Absolutely, and it's just a collection of blogs and ideas and concepts that we all come out with. So if you are interested, it's called The Book of Parasearch, and it's $7.99 on Amazon, and it's available worldwide.
Fantastic.
So wherever you are, you can order the book on Amazon. So yeah, if you're enjoying our chats and our ideas and concepts, get the book. There's so much more in there.
Most definitely. And on that note, we'd like to say good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.